Welcome back, campers, to another YouTube video on the Camp Legend YouTube channel. My name is Gibbles and Bits, and with me is my best friend and Lorcana partner, Dead Broke Nerd. And we are in reveal season. We are in the hype of the Inklands, the Into the Inklands set that drops here in a couple weeks, here at the end of February. And we have been heavy into evaluating internally these new cards that keep coming out as we approach the release date for the local game stores. And then shortly after there, the big box stores for Into the Inklands, the third set for the Lorcana trading card game. And today we're going to go through about 10 or 11 cards that we think have labeled as disruptors in the meta of what we think is going to be impactful from the first half, I'll call it, of the Into the Inklands cards that we've seen so far during the reveal season. There's going to be, I would assume, a ramp up here in the next week or two where we will see the full breadth of all of the cards that are going to be coming out for Into the Inklands. There's so much that we haven't even scratched the surface of. I'm sure they're keeping some really powerful and interesting cards towards the back half of the reveal season to really get the trains going for the Lorcana players. But we've got about half of them in our pool, and we've each picked 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah, and you know, Gibby and I were, as we're looking at all these cards, there's so many that look fun, there's so many we're excited for, but we wanted to sort of talk about the ones that we see have the best shot at shaking up the meta in a noticeable way. So like, how we define disruptor is a card that either an existing deck is going to radically change itself in order to accommodate, or is going to have to take into account when deck building from another play style that we expect might see play at the top table. So, you know, something that is a slightly better version of an existing card, not a disruptor. Something that does something radically new, or something that does something so powerful that we think it needs to be accounted for. That's kind of what we are projecting out as cards that could massively disrupt the meta. So with that in mind, Gibby, let's go ahead and jump into our list. I'm pretty excited.
All right, so let's get into the slides here. I thought it would be interesting just as a first initial slide here, just to take a snapshot of what the meta looks like. Now, this isn't necessarily representative of all metas across all different local game stores and different areas and different plays. This is just from Pixelborn data for some of the top players in Pixelborn. So as we kind of look here at the meta, as we're evaluating disruptors, I think it's important to understand what the meta looks like a little bit right now. What are we necessarily disrupting? I don't think it's any surprise between either of us, or for that matter, most Lorcana players, that the most prevalent and successful deck, when you look at the win rates here, is Bounce Control Ruby Amethyst. It is a very, very strong deck, one that you and I personally believe isn't the most skill intensive to pilot. There are a lot of kind of absolute effects within the deck that don't necessarily require you to outplay your opponent. The effects of what playing this card is going to do is a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more in front of you.
The fact that there's a 55% win rate deck at a whopping almost 30% meta share on Pixelborn is like astronomical. Yeah. Hey, Jinx, nice.
Yay!
It's, I mean, normally when you see a play rate creep up that high, and this is like a general statement for most games, when a play rate gets that high, the win rate tends to take a hit. So what this means is, now granted, this is being the top 100 player data, which means, like, you know, first off, you don't have bad players playing these decks because this is top 100 player data. Okay, so you have good players playing these decks. And despite the fact that everyone knows that this is the best deck and is playing decks like Bell, Ramp, and Tiana aggro to try to either way outlast it in the case of the Bell Ramp, or way go underneath it and turn off their Be Prepareds in the case of Tiana aggro, it still is maintaining a 55% win rate, which is just truly stupid. So anyways, we see some decks on here that I expect, if the meta changes, they won't completely disappear, but they will likely become more what I call honest, which is stop teching so hard into one matchup. But all of that is contingent on if some of these new cards we're about to look at can actually disrupt or force Bounce Control to do something different. Don't know if we'll get there, but let's take a look at some of those cards.
Yeah.
Okay, I picked this one out because I think this has one of the best chances at making aggro really, 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 really good. We've seen cards like this in other games like Hearthstone, where Bloodlust and Shaman allows you to end the turn on turn 5 in exchange for the fact that it is an expensive action card that you cannot develop afterwards because you spent all your money on one thing. By the time you get to turn 5 and 6 in an aggro deck, and we know that Amber can support extremely fast aggro decks that can go extremely wide and protect its board under something like a Simba with Bodyguard. 99 Puppies is going to be able to allow you to look at a board state where you can quest to 17 or 18 and say, and your opponent knows this, and they just need to last like one more turn until they get to like a Be Prepared or Grab Your Swords or whatever. And you say, I'm actually just going to win right now from hand in the same way that bounce control decks are doing with goats near the end of the game. 99 Puppies is an extremely powerful aggro card. The only problem with it is you can't pack 4 of them in the deck, because it's going to brick your hand. But if you run 2 of these, you sometimes will just get to end the game on turn 5 or 6 from hand, and your opponent will not be accounting for this. It's going to screw up the math that protects players from aggro decks, where they can look and say, I can afford to set something up this turn. I can afford to play a 5-drop this turn so that I can sing Grab Your Swords next turn. They cannot trust that math anymore. This is going to be a really impactful card. I'm staking my name on it.
Yeah, the only way I can see this deck or this card being run as a 4 of any deck is if you comboed it with Amber and Steel, and you run things either like the Simbas, the 1-drop, which admittedly isn't a great aggro card because it only quests for 1, but something like the Huntsman, which I've seen more of in aggro decks for Amber and Steel, on 2, where every time you quest, you can draw a card and ditch a card. So you'd be able to kind of get rid of that second copy out of your hand and put something better in your hand to be able to play out, or ink for that matter. So I can see that being a way to get around the inconsistencies of running 4 of it. Otherwise, I think there's a great 2 of 3 of it in aggro decks, and you're happy to see it and play it on curve and just quest out, especially if you're first player.
Yeah. So I have been very excited about this character. Not only have I realized I'm a Ursula stan, just as a character. Poor Unfortunate Souls is a bop, but
it is.
One of the things that this card is really exciting is it is clearly directly countering probably 2 of the best decks in format. Definitively, Bounce Control, which has a really powerful song in Be Prepared, which sits in its hand for a long period of time waiting for them to use it. Ursula is actually a card that isn't necessarily great to play right on turn 2, although you can, and it has a nice defensive stat line for mid-range decks to be able to leverage in trades if they can either buff her attack, or if it's a Ruby Emerald deck, potentially, use a Teeth and Ambitions with it, right? It also survives things like Grab Your Swords, another card that this wants to be discarding from the enemy's hand. And all of that still doesn't, it still pales in comparison to probably the best thing about this card, which is you get to look at their hand. We've been seeing blue decks running, was it Nowhere to Hide? I think is the name of the card. And I
called that card at the beginning of Floodborne. I was like, this is going to be a good card. And we had a pretty solid discussion about, is this card worth running? It seems like if you're a good player, or like if you're used to maybe a specific matchup is maybe a better way to put it, do you really need to look at your opponent's hand, or can you kind of see through their play patterns what they're going to play? But Nowhere to Hide has kind of emerged as a really useful tool, especially since it tutors.
It has been popping up a lot, and Ursula allows you to do that, and also establish a character on the board, which and the even greater upside of being able to ditch a song if it's there. Almost every deck is playing some kind of song. Yeah, if they have 2 things, you get to, there are times when you might play this and look at your Steel opponent's hand and see a Grab Your Swords and also see a Storm Rage On and say, actually, Storm Rage On hurts me more right now. I'm going to ditch that because I want to snowball my board, and then I know that the Grab Your Swords is coming and I can prepare for it. Literally, Ursula allows you to be prepared. Even if you look at your opponent's hand and see 2 Be Prepareds there, you can ditch one and the next one's coming and you can plan accordingly. I think this is the most meta disruptor card in the entire set, and I haven't even seen the back half of it. I'm putting that down. Like, this card is so good.
It's going to be so good.
The only question is, this is very clearly not an aggro card. This might see a little play in control, but there's not a fantastic Emerald control deck right now. The closest thing is like an Emerald Steel discardy deck, right? Because Emerald and Steel historically so far do not have a ton of independent card draw outside of Prince John. And so does this fit in that? Undetermined, right? Does it fit in a as of yet, unfigured out mid-range deck that features green? I definitely think so. And I know that that's the first thing I'm going to be experimenting with day one of Into the Inklands is an Ursula deck that supports a mid-range play style.
Yeah, and even to think about it, like let's say you drop Ursula on 2 and you look at your opponent's hand and you see that they have 2 very impactful songs, or very impactful actions for that matter. Oh no, because it's got to be songs. If they have 2 very impactful songs, yeah. I think there is also a case that you could run Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo in a deck like this and just recast her again and ditch another card from their hand. Because you can even,
especially if there are other great targets for Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo along with Ursula, right? Like if you have enough cards that like want to be replayed and then have on play effects, then like that's a great card to play anyways. So
yeah, especially like if you get out like a Bucky and something like that instead of like an Ursula or something like that. If you're going to, if you bring out Bucky and then you Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo away, bring out Ursula, get to look at their hand, ditch a card, and then now you've got a good understanding about what your play pattern from there is going to be as you move into the mid to late game. I think Ursula is going to be very flexible and a very strong card.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this just got previewed today. Mickey Mouse Trumpeter.
Now, you're going to have to forgive me because I couldn't find a good copy of the English version. So go ahead and tell us what it does in English.
Yeah, so I don't know what the name of the ability is, but you exert it, you spend 2 ink, and then you can play any character you want for free. This card has a glaring weakness that I want to call out first, which is its 1 defense, 1 health. Obviously, this makes it extremely weak to a lot of steel removal, and steel is very, very strong right now. But I want to... This is a little bit of a wild card pick for me. I had not picked a steel card, and I was like, I really should pick a steel card for our discussion. And this one came out this morning, and I said, this is the one. Let me paint you a picture of a world where steel isn't popular. Now, we don't know when that will be, okay? But with a lot of decks with obviously, resist in like aggro steel decks rising up, right? With ward becoming significantly more prevalent in green and blue, there exists a world where perhaps steel isn't as all over the meta as it is currently. And more than that, there exists a chance that there are cards that there are some that already exist, like Mouse Armor, like one of the Titans that can hand resist out to other things, right? There are cards that can give ward potentially. We don't know. And in a world where you can either cheat this out on like turn 2, we can already cheat this out on turn 3 in abundance of ways, right? But in a world where you can cheat this out really early or protect it, control decks are going to have a really hard time if you can drop a giant Goofy or a Cinderella or a Maui really, really early in the game. And again, I want to remind you that there is a host of discounting cards already out there ready to bring the price of Mickey Mouse Trumpeter down. I'm not even going to predict that this is going to be great right away. But we have seen in other games that when there are cards, no matter how, easily exploitable, but when there are cards like Barnes and Hearthstone or like Targon's Peak in Legends of Runeterra, whenever there's a way to play something really expensive way early, there is a chance that it ends up completely and radically and irrevocably changing the metagame as decks scramble to try to be able to make sure they have an answer to Mickey Mouse Trumpeter. So I'm just throwing that out.
Even stay within the same game. I mean, you've not that it's as exacerbated as that, and there is some randomness to it, but you've seen the same kind of effect come from Mufasa in Amber. That deck popped up all over the place, and there's several versions of it with a bunch of different ink combinations. where Mufasa being able to not only quest for a decent amount, but then the only downside of, okay, what happens if it gets removed from the board, being able to bring something else out from your deck as long as it's character and can keep that tempo, and God forbid it's something big.
Yeah,
it's a great value. This is a value card if you can figure out how to keep it safe consistently. There are some locations
either keeping it safe or discounting it so much that your opponent does not have time to play a more expensive Storm Rage on before you can use its ability. If there's
I
ever
could
a
see
world
like
where
a
we can get
turn
this on turn 2,
I can even see like a turn 2 Cogsworth, turn 3 Shift Cogsworth, and then playing this even on curve on 4, where now Mickey Mouse has got Ward.
There are enough ways. Mickey Mouse would have resist. But if you play Aurora, then yes.
Which is the same thing. Aurora can be
Ward.
shifted on 3.
Yeah. I think there's a world where someone figures this deck out and shows up to an event and nobody can deal with it and tops an event, and then everybody's going to have to figure out, okay, this is a thing. Crap. How do I deal with it? I believe that will happen. Not necessarily in the Inklands meta, but in a meta in some foreseeable future, this will top an event. I'm just gonna make that prediction, and we'll see if the money line hits. Jim Hawkins is a cracked out card. That's why it's a legendary, I suppose.
It's very good.
The thing is like, we don't know how good locations are going to be. We don't entirely know how good they're going to be because they're very low tempo, right? And when they are attacked into, they do not damage things back. Which is a little bit of a scary thing, although I would love to see a location printed that does do that. I think that'd be a really cool location. No, I think Jim Hawkins represents an answer to the fact that, oh no, locations are expensive and low tempo. Whatever shall I do? Well, listen, Jim Hawkins plays it for free and then can immediately move there. And there are some really great locations with good effects that are on the pricier side of like 4 or less. I'm talking about Agrabah, which collects 2 lore every turn. I'm talking about Fang, which collects 2 lore every turn. It costs 4, right? But what's nice about it is that when somebody is there, they have evasive and ward. So you're telling me that on turn 5, you can slap down a Jim Hawkins, play Fang for free, immediately ship him off to Fang, where he then gains evasive and ward. And at the start of your next turn, you'll collect 2 from Fang and can quest for 2 more with Jim Hawkins. That is a ridiculous value play at turn 5.
Yeah, and for the record, for anybody who is maybe a little bit as unfamiliar with locations, since they are going to be new to the game, to Lorcana with the release of Into the Inklands, locations come in exerted. You can attach your characters to them for a certain cost printed on the card. Most locations, not all of them, gain passive lore at the start of your turn during your setup phase, but they usually have some sort of effect like giving resist or, as you mentioned, evasive, whatever it might be, to them, depending on the price point of them. And there's always a cost to moving your character to a location, but you can move a character to a location when they are played. They don't have to be quote unquote dry. They can still have that stomach sickness or have the wet ink on the card when you play them, move to a location, and you can pay that cost immediately. And Jim Hawkins says, I don't care about any of those costs. Here's a location that costs 4 or less, and I'm going there. He's just the ultimate traveler.
Yeah, and the thing that's nice about these things too is that the reason why I think this stands to be a meta disrupting card is because the big problem with locations is if you're buying locations, you're not buying characters, right? And those locations are going to be able to collect passive lore, but they are very vulnerable to being attacked into with things like, Mempfoxes and Mauis, right? But if you're able to drop down a character and a location at the same time, that's a lot for your opponent to immediately handle. And a lot of times when you in the current iteration of the game without locations, when you have a big, huge, swing of a turn where you drop down a ton of value all at the same time, the best answer for the best decks in the game are be prepared or grab your swords. But those things only affect characters. They do not affect locations, right? And so that gives you a little bit of a consolation prize, which mid-range decks are really sorely lacking right now, which is, if they get their entire characters wiped, normally right now they are in a world of trouble, but with locations, they still have something left to build off of for future turns. And Jim Hawkins really just gives you that safe, reliable value. And I think it's going to be at the top tables. I just really believe that. So
I do too.
Yeah, great card. That's why it's a legendary. So the boss is on a roll. I actually, this is a little bit of a cheat, which is I think this is going to be in existing meta decks, while also potentially forging new meta decks, or at least serving as something of a backbone. What's really nice about this card is that it's a song. If this wasn't a song, I'm not sure I would be interested in it. But there's a lot of times where you have a Maleficent you just slap down. And this is another great song that you can potentially play, just like Friends on the Other Side, with that Maleficent that now serves very little value. Or a Mimfox that came in, traded into something, and now is just sitting around. Instead of collecting only one with a quest, you can sing this card, which gets you a lore, just like it would have been if you quested, but more importantly, allows you to do I don't think people understand how ridiculous this effect is. Looking at the top 5 cards, stacking them any way you want, and dumping the ones you don't want onto the bottom is cracked. Like, it's insane. This card provides so much value to a control deck, you have no idea. And so, obviously, I think that there's going to be some experimentation of this with Ruby and Amethyst, of course. But I also think that other control decks with Amethyst would love to have this. Steel and Amethyst would kill for this card because they have a lot of answers to things and they have a lot of ways to draw cards, but the answers that they have, because they are in Steel and not in Ruby, are damage based and they're conditional, and so you need to have the right removal at the right time, something that has at times held that archetype back. But now if you're looking at a board and you're like, boy, I really need to grab your swords, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, hopefully find it, stack it right on top. Okay, and that's a big difference for if you had looked at the top 5 cards of your deck and would have drawn a Storm Rage on. That wouldn't have saved you. But that Grab Your Sword sitting in the 5th card, now you can move it to the top, collect that, and have an answer while also gaining a passive lore on top of it. And in theory, you don't even have to pay mana for this. Like, it's crazy. And if you have another card already out or ready to play that can draw you the card that you stacked on top, this is fantastic.
Exactly.
It's going to bring up other Amethyst control archetypes that are not just Ruby and Sapphire. I think this is really, really cool.
I do too. I actually think this is going to be applicable across the board. I don't think it's just going to be a control decks too. Imagine being able to, I mean, one of the most prevalent aggressive ink type combos is Amber and Amethyst. And if you are able to play Cinderella Ballroom on one that can sing up to 3, as long as you can guarantee that you got a 1-drop and a 2-drop in your hand to start, like you can hard mulligan for a Cinderella Ballroom Sensation and a 2-drop to be able to fall up on turn 2, since that's when you would play this. Yeah. You can sing Cinderella. You can sing this on turn 2 with Cinderella, stack the 4 cards, or whatever you find that you like on the top of your deck, and maybe drop like a Simba for the bodyguard on 2. And you've got now a protected board, and you know exactly what is coming. And if you're playing in person in a local game store and you don't necessarily know what your opponent's going to be playing across from you, and then you're like, oh, I see they inked a green card and they just played something in Steel, I know exactly what they're playing. I need a little bit more. I don't want to necessarily see units that have 1 health. I need something a little bit sturdier. You can just get rid of all of those cards and you start limiting the downside, especially for aggressive decks. Like, aggressive decks lose too often when they don't know what their matchup is going to be, or they draw a hand that is bad into a specific archetype. So this limits the downside, I think, of a lot of decks.
And it also allows you to have the easier ability to make sure you get an inkable card on the following turn. You know, oh man, I really need to ink something next turn. Okay, I'm actually going to put a card I don't want on top so that I'll draw it and then can ink it. There's so much flexibility. Great players, strong players are going to really like this card because they will know exactly what to do
with
that information. Units. Yeah, or that. Yeah. So probably I'm just going to say this will probably end up being a top 10 card from the set.
I agree. All right, we're going to move into the 5 or 6 cards that I've picked. Well, actually, I've got 5 cards, and at the very end, there's one special card that DBN and I agreed on that we think is going to be super, super strong that we'll reveal to you at the end of this video, so stick around. I'm going to move into my top 5 cards here that I think will be disruptors. And then along came Zeus, a steel card, an action song, deal 5 damage to a chosen character or location. And that's part of why I think this card is going to be so good, is that you can deal 5 damage to a location. The other fact that you can use a character that costs 4 or more to sing this unlocks a lot of other different possibilities too. You've got several cards that have the ability in Amber to sing up to a 4 cost. Things like Sebastian on 2. Yeah. Being able to sing up to a 4 cost haven't really been important because there haven't really been anything worth singing at the 4 slot. And now you've got a very powerful removal tool and a very common archetype being Steel and Amber, that you can sing this song and remove very powerful, thick units that otherwise would be tough to get rid of. So I think this is going to be a very great removal tool. I mean, it is uninkable at that 4 slot, but if you're cheating it out by singing it with something that can sing above its weight class, as I'm going to call it, it's really not that big of a concern. Or even if you end up drawing it and playing it on that 4, we've seen Let the Storm Rage On, which is the 3 cost, deal 2 and draw a card. Drawing a card is part of why Let the Storm Rage On is so good, but it's 3 and uninkable, and that has seen play in almost every single Steel deck as a piece of removal / drawing a card. I don't think this card is going to be short of anything at the same power level. I think it's going to be a fantastic card, and you'll see a lot of it.
There's also the upside that this brings, not location oriented, but like there are a lot of strong cards in the metagame right now that have, higher defenses that really hurts Steel's ability to efficiently remove them. Most notably, Surfer Mini. I mean, and this is a little overkill on Surfer Mini, but right now you basically need 2 cards to clear a Surfer Mini. You need, some card that does 1 or 2 damage and another card that does 1 or 2 damage, because except for Strength of Raging Fire, which is something that is a little bit contingent on how well you're doing, it's kind of a win more card. It's a card that locks the game away, which is why you don't see a lot of decks running. Well, you don't see every deck running 4 copies of it because it's contingent on your board state, and that can be troublesome, right? This finally gives you a card that can do a huge chunk all at once, and it's like, I need to kill this, Surfer Mini or a Goofy or a Ray, or those evasives, especially where Steel normally is great at challenging, but you can actually defeat something with evasive quickly in 1 hit, and you're good to go. This is opening up a lot of counterplay, but also a lot of deck building challenge to Steel decks that are looking at this and like, oh, but it's really good, but another uninkable, where do I make room? And that's going to be an interesting thing for Steel.
Yeah, and this card is 1 short. I wanted to look it up, make sure I had the right stat line. It's 1 short of being able to 1-shot a Tiana, but it does set you up for the ability to do that big chunk damage and kill Tiana more efficiently if that does continue to stay a problem card and as a sticky unit at that 4 slot. So I think along came Zeus will be a great removal tool. Mm-hmm. Helga Sinclair. Now, this is a card that you and I are a little unsure of, but I do think it is going to be good. And now we've seen several cards come out that do kind of ping damage. For example, Robin Hood at the 2 slot in Steel has made its way into some Steel song lists. Overall, we thought going into the Rise of the Floodborn that there was going to be a very strong deck that emerged in Steel and Emerald that was kind of like a ping damage deck, and then utilize some of the higher cost cards like the Cheshire Cat from the Shadows to be able to remove some of those damaged characters. And that deck didn't necessarily make its way to the top like I think I was hoping it would, but I do think this deck or this card revisits that deck idea and maybe brings into a little bit more relevance with a really nice aggressive shift target that can kind of bring you into that mid-late game. And I think that was the problem, is that deck was just a little too slow. and a little too inconsistent with the removal. So Helga Sinclair, Femme Fatale, is a Floodborn villain for 5 costs, uninkable for 4. Shift for 3 that says whenever this character quests, you may deal 3 damage to a chosen damage character. So gives you the ability to deal damage while also still questing and making use of the unit on the body on board, which that dual action of being able to move towards your win condition while still helping you kind of keep board state control, I think is really good. Not to mention if you have anything else on the board that is also being able to do damage, you almost look at being able to kind of keep your opponent at bay and never allow them to use your units if you can build a solid enough board. Especially if you shift this in, there is a 2-cost Helga Sinclair, so you can shift this in on 3 and immediately quest and deal that 3 damage and remove something that your opponent didn't see coming off the board. That is very, very strong. One of my favorite removal tools to come from Rise of the Floodborn is Ring the Bell. And this does synergize very well with Ring the Bell. There isn't anything in the game currently that has resist 3, not unless you're stacking multiple units or multiple effects. Like if you have a Tiana and a mouse armor, or if you have a Cinderella Stout Heart and a mouse armor or something like that, or the new location. So the 3 damage that Helga Sinclair does will get past any resist unit and then allow you to be able to use Ring the Bell for some of your stickier, hard to remove units. So I do think the 3 damage as opposed to something like 1 or 2 is really good.
The problem with that in my mind is that it does have to hit an already damaged character. So I feel like it actually occupies the same space as Ring the Bell. Now that can be good,
sure,
right? Like the ability to say, okay, I have redundancy for this finish off ability. Like that's what Ring the Bell does, and you have it on a character. And with it being a shift, you actually can theoretically surprise your opponent by being able to shift it in and immediately quest with it if you have a baby Helga down, right? Where I'm uncertain is like I don't think that archetype is lacking for ways to damage things, and to kill things. I actually think the archetype is lacking for consistency and being able to, draw out a reliable curve and be able to consistently ink things. And this is not helping either of those, right? Like if there's a card that was like every time you damage an opponent's character, draw a card, now we're cooking, right? Because you have a lot of ways to deal little damage to things and then some big things to finish them off, like Big Cheshire Cat and Ring the Bell. This is another one of those. Great. And like if something else pops up that is like, hey, you draw a card every time you damage something, again, now we're cooking. But this doesn't solve for that problem. And the uninkableness of this is really scary because that deck, Robin Hood's uninkable, and that is always going to be, a card you want in that green steel deck. The only thing that I'm like, this would be fantastic for is if somehow Emerald also gets a card that can easily damage undamaged things. So I can see a world where there's a card that's for Emerald that's like damage an undamaged character. And that way you can set yourself up and play this in a consistency color like Amber, or Amethyst, where you can have a lot of easy access, 0 synergy card draw to rely on. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. And the price point, if you shift it, is great.
Yeah, the stat line is going to be good. The ink count is going to be good, and the being able to kind of get you into that mid game dealing damage, as long as you can already have a damage unit, I think will be good if we see cards as you mentioned that synergize with it, either coming out from this the rest of this Inklands set. It seems like an archetype that they're rather committing to. Because we're continuing to see more of this ping damage kind of deck. So we'll see what else or other kind of support we get for Helga Sinclair. Map of Treasure Planet. This is a 3-cost item from Steel. I went back recently and watched because we're getting quite a few Treasure Planet cards. I went back and watched that movie. If you have not seen that movie recently or don't remember much about it, go back and watch it. It is so good. It is so creative. I love that movie. Fun. And I'm now even more excited that we're getting more Treasure Planet cards in this set. So 3-cost steel item, inkable, that says when you turn they exert this card sideways, you can pay 1 less for the next location you play this turn. and you pay 1 less statically to move characters to a location. So it's got 2 abilities. One of the best things I think about items here is when they have effects that don't require a hefty ink cost on top of getting them out. I think that's when cards are at their best. You need the efficiency of them, and you don't really want to have to wait to play them or wait to get the full effect of them. So being able to play on 3, map of treasure planet, and then maybe either on turn 3 if you've got a 1-cost location, or turn 4 being able to play a little bit more of an expensive location and then pay 1 less to just move all of the other characters that you've already established on the board to that location, I think is going to be fantastic. Once again, this is predicated on the idea that locations are going to be impactful. I do expect that there are going to be at least a couple locations that we look at and go, this is a perfect fit for this archetype, or this is deck defining because it has this nice location in it with this effect, like the ones that give evasive or the ones that give resist. Resist is just a great keyword to be able to have on cards. So map of treasure planet synergizes well with a lot of that, and is just a really good way to efficiently cheat out effects that you otherwise wouldn't have access to without this item.
Yeah, I agree. I think this card will serve as a backbone of an archetype we have not yet like fully conceived of, right? But like, you know, as soon as you start to hit like turn 3 is really the cutoff for playing a item that allows you to either ramp or get things at a discount. Like, we know that you can do it with Fishbone Quill. Fishbone Quill exists because you can play it down, immediately start ramping. This is kind of like that, which is it will save you a lot of money. It'll pay itself off over the course of the next turn or two, and then continue to give you that returning value for the rest of the game. The question that we have to answer is, are there great locations that we want to play multiple copies of? Or, you know, 1 or 2 locations that moving characters is really, really important? And I think the answer will end up being yes. But it just remains to be seen. And the other thing about this is that it's in steel, which means you can play Captain Hook and Prince Eric or Jafar in your first 2 turns, and that will buy you a lot of time against aggro decks, because those things are the biggest hitting early game stabilizers in the game. So like, you can afford against a lot of matchups to take a turn off to play Map of Treasure Planet, because you will have, you know, fantastic 1 and 2 drops to protect you, you know, in steel. So that's a nice thing to consider.
And quality units as you move forward into the mid and late game in steel as well.
Exactly. Yep.
To kind of make up some of that tempo. Yeah, I think Treasure Planet, Map of Treasure Planet is going to be great. And we'll just have to see what kind of deck it fits into. Voyage. So kind of keeping within that same location-based kind of focus here. Move up to 2 characters of yours to the same location for free at a 1-cost inkable action in Ruby. This card is fantastic because what it does do is it is so much ink cheat for a 1-cost action, given that you have a location down. Like, I can't fathom that this card is at 1 ink. So you have 2 characters, or move up to 2 characters first. Even if you only move 1 character that is a quality character to a location that really needs it, you've gotten everything that you needed to out of this card. And there are several locations that we've even seen previewed already that cost 2 and 3 per character to move a character to that location because the effect is so strong. So being able to drop a location, you have 1 extra ink, and then shove a bunch of characters over there is so good. Like, being able to drop, like, let's say you play Jim Hawkins on 5, who we just talked about. He plays out a location of 4 cost or less for free, and he can move there for free. And if you have an extra ink left, like let's say it's turn 6, you can then move 2 other units you've already got on board to that location on that turn immediately. Like, it's such a huge tempo play to be able to move characters to a location if that ends up being like an important thing for some decks.
And some great candidates for moving around is going to be the new Peter Pan, which collects the lore whenever he moves to a location, and Shinzi, which is one of the hyenas, where when it's at a location, it gets +3 attack and it draws a card whenever you challenge. The little 1-cost Minnie Mouse, it's a rock climbing Minnie Mouse, right?
Yeah.
She's great because whenever she's at a location, she has +2 attack. There are other cards like that as well. I believe there's a Milo in red that has +2 attack when at a location. You have cards that are going to be able to, where like there are some great locations that have effects, but the ones that have effects have a higher move cost. And then there are some little locations, that just collect a little bit of passive lore, but you have characters that still want to move there and get buffs. And so there's enough flexibility around, either locations that are worth moving to or characters that are worth moving, that a card like this, adding some consistency, and smoothing out potentially your your ink expenditure for the turn is going to be worth it, so long as you have enough card draw that top decking this doesn't ruin your game.
Yeah.
I think this is a incredible card. The fact that it's inkable saves it, thank goodness. I don't think you could play this if it wasn't inkable, but because it's
Agreed.
inkable, you get to ink this at the beginning of the game, and then if you draw your 3rd copy or 4th copy later, it just gives you a ton of options. I'm really excited about this, this card, and plan to play a lot of this pontoon boat in the future.
Me as well. All right, this will be the last of my characters that I preview here before we get to our one consensus pick of a good disruptor card here. Scrooge McDuck, richest duck in the world. He's a hero in Sapphire for 5 cost uninkable, 3/5. He's got evasive on his turn, so he can challenge characters that have evasive on your turn as long as they're exerted. And it says, during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may play an item for free. Now, this is a character that we aren't necessarily sold is going to be deck defining, meta defining, or is going to be so strong that it's going to make it into a top deck. But what it's going to do, part of our disruptor definition, is that it's going to open up a new thought process and a new logic for how an existing archetype plays. And that, for me, is all of the item decks that run in Sapphire, whether it's the Sapphire Ruby item ramp that you see where you're constantly playing popsicles and bouncing them with Flaversham, or ditching them with Flaversham and then redrawing them with Nick Wilde, trying to get Tamatoa out. Scrooge McDuck is going to create a different archetype here because it's going to want you to play. You can get out cheap items, sure, but you start opening up the options for more expensive items that maybe you otherwise wouldn't consider because they didn't fit the mold of wanting to like recur and play down and like cycle your items, play something cheap down, draw a card off of it, ditch it, draw more cards, play it again. Like Scrooge McDuck doesn't want you to play those kinds of items necessarily because you don't necessarily get the most value and ink cheat out of it. There is a new card that just came out called Lucky Dime that is worth, I think it's 7 ink.
7.
That says when you play it down and then to exert it, you have to spend 2 ink and you gain ink equal to a character that you've got on your side of the board.
Gain lore.
Sorry, not ink, lore. Equal to a character that you've got on your side of the board. And that's a fantastic ability. But you might question, is that worth it for 7 ink? Well, Scrooge says, I'm going to be out on board. I'm going to challenge a unit. I'm going to play that out for free. And then I still got all of this ink to be able to use that ability to use other items. Like if there's a new Sapphire card that allows you when she quests to ready a unit, to ready an item. So then you could do it again. Yeah. You could do Lucky Dime again. The combos that are available now with Scrooge McDuck and this ability are a lot bigger than the simple cycle item tools that you've previously been utilizing, or just utilizing lanterns and anything like that with Amber decks. Now, is this card going to be deck defining in something top? Yet to be seen. It is uninkable at a 5 cost and for not that great of a body for a 5 cost unit. But I do think that it is 100% intriguing and will be tested by the player base as a whole to see if it is worth the body.
Yeah, so I like this card a lot, and I like, for context, I'm not an item hater. Actually, it's the opposite. Like, my meta deck that I play is popsicles, Ruby and Sapphire popsicles with a combo finisher. of Ariel and Grandpappy and running Magic Golden Flower and doing some crazy stuff like that. It's really, really, really fun. This is interesting to me because I'm like, I do run a couple slightly more expensive items. I run a couple Eye of the Fates, and this is nice because it can challenge evasives, which is great for all of the mini surfers running around. The problem I am seeing with this is similar to other cards that come down and threaten something like Mulan. Your opponent will look at that, and if they are not worried about it, well, that's probably a sign that they've got a great answer to whatever you're going to do. And if they are worried about it, they have the ability to just stop questing and don't give you a target. And if your deck is built around the idea of playing Lucky Dime and chaining that with Tamatoa and doing all these crazy things, the Scrooge part is going to fall flat because your opponent has the ability to just not give you a target, and then you sit there and twiddle your thumbs like, oh man, I was going to do all these cool things, but now I literally can't. And you, by the time you get to turn 5 or 6, you've shaped your hand off of what you think you're going to be doing over the next couple turns, and that makes it awkward. Now, I think this card could slot into existing archetypes where, like, hey, I've got a couple 2 or 3 cost items. Fishbone Quill for free is still for free, right? And more than that, you play it down, and it's a deterrent to your opponent to quest with those surfers, or if they're going aggro, you can then clean it up. And that's pretty good. So I think that we will find that Scrooge will be more of just a value play in decks that can afford the uninkable cost, as opposed to a combo enabler because of the sort of the difficulty in setting him up in such a way that you can guarantee a kill, unless you start blending him with things that can either give him rush or things that can allow you to challenge, unready characters. But that's kind of a lot to ask. So I like Scrooge McDuck a lot as an extra option for existing archetypes, and as a counter to Surfer Mini. I'm just a little bit uncertain about its efficacy in a wholly new archetype like a Lucky Dime combo. That being said, one thing that's cool about Lucky Dime, it goes off of the lore value of the characters, and Tamatoa's lore value scales based on the number of items in play. So there's certainly an ability, if you can get a Lucky Dime in play and a Tamatoa at the same time. If you have 10 ink, you can have a Tamatoa already out, have a bunch of items and popsicles and stuff, drop the Lucky Dime, and immediately use it and collect like 7 all at once. There's some neat stuff. I will be teching a Lucky Dime in my Tamatoa, popsicle deck for sure. So there's some neat stuff going on here with items.
Yeah, and if Scrooge will be a part of that deck type, if it will make it as a worthy addition to the slot, is yet to be seen. So I think that is a very interesting card, and we'll see plenty of testing for it.
And one more thing with it, it's going to be in one of the starter decks, so it will be easy for people to get a hold of, which is great for a super rare.
Which is important.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and then last but not least, our card that we consensus agree, Morph. Morph is a 2-cost inkable space goo from Treasure Planet. When I saw this card revealed, I was like, what is this from? And then watched Treasure Planet, now I know. You may play another character with shift on this character as if this character had any name. There are so many cards from the first chapter, from the second chapter, from Floodborn, I'm going to call it the second chapter, that you wish you could play in a deck because the effect on it is good, but maybe the base version of the card isn't good, or the color combination you have to play it with isn't ideal. That Morph just unlocks so much for you. Yeah. Being able to like currently, we've got Floodborn Shift Sad Beast, as people are calling it, or Emo Beast. That is one of the best cards, if not the best card currently in the game. It is so valuable. I think it's the most expensive card on TCG Player.
I think now it is, yeah.
And there's no beast to shift it into. Like, it's got this shift on 3 ability, and you have no choice but to play it on 5 because there's no beast cheaper than 5 right now. Morph says you can play beast on 3 and start collecting cards from it. That's insane. There are other cards like Bell in Emerald as well that has as a fantastic ability that the cheaper Belle in Emerald isn't really that great. And you'd love to be able to play her out on 3 and start oppressing your opponent with the lore count that she's got and her ability that forces you to challenge and have a huge downside and get rid of your whole hand. But you don't really want to play the cheaper Belle that's also uninkable. So Morph being inkable and on 2 says, if you don't deal with me right now, you're going to have a big road ahead of you handling the board of whatever I'm about to shift into on 3, because that's, or 4 for that matter.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that obviously we know that there is some existing shift cards that are extremely powerful. Things like, Beast and Tinkerbell and Steel, right? But you also have some really neat options even internally to green, right? So at 4, you're going to have the new Milo Thatch, another card that I heavily consider putting on this list. I think it's going to be a huge game-winning card for a mid-range green archetype. You're going to have your own Helga Sinclair, Gibby, can shift right onto this on turn 3. Which we already kind of talked about, is probably a pretty strong play, especially if you have been able to damage anything with your first turn or 2 of characters, right? Obviously, the downside with Morph, like we talked about with Micky, Trumpeter, is it only has the 1 defense. Steal, grr. But when you play it on turn 2, if they spend their whole turn 2 or turn 3 spending all of their ink to defeat Morph, you're still slowing them down. You're still losing. So this is never going to be I don't think this is ever going to be a card that goes in an aggro deck. This is a card that goes in a mid-range or control deck for consistency of shifting characters. And those decks don't mind if your opponent trades a card 1 for 1 in the early game. They want the game to slow down a little bit, right? And so I don't think it's the end of the world if Morph gets, smote right when it comes out. But if it sticks for even 1 turn, it opens up a toolbox of possibilities of things that can come down for it. So I think Morph is going to be an incredibly sought after card. Not only is it really fun, but the possibilities for Emerald to all of a sudden take off with every other color combination that has a card that you want to shift is absolutely right there. And I think that this is fantastic for what is probably the worst color in the Floodborne meta from a power perspective. And I just think I'm really excited to see where Emerald goes, both with this card and some of the other ones we previewed earlier. So Gibby and I have been so high on this card for so long.
Well, that's going to do it for our evaluation of our top 10 at this point disruptor cards that we think are coming in the into the Inklands set for Lorcana. Feel free to join us on Discord if you can. In our Lorcana channel, we will be posting all of the other cards as they are revealed on anything else that comes out on the back half of the reveal season as we approach the Into the Inklands drop date here at the end of February. I think February 21st is the date that local game stores should be receiving it, and I would expect March 1st, if not sooner. Usually about a week lag for the big box stores. If you're not a Lorcana fan, we've got plenty of other content on our YouTube channel at Camp Legend, as well as other content that we are putting out, audio and video now, and Spotify, all of our normal places, Apple Music or Apple Podcasts.
That's right. Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Casts, whatever. They're all the places. We're all the places, gang.
Yeah, but come visit our YouTube channel. Come join us on Discord for all the other game content. We are reviewing a different card game every single month with our starter set series. We're about to dive into Fights in Tight Spaces in our February version. It's going to be a fantastic game. We'll be doing some gameplay review videos of that, so you guys can watch us play it firsthand, along with us diving into the game and our review of it. So come join us there on Discord and YouTube, and we'll catch you guys later.